Oops, I accidentally backed into your car, my sister said with a smile, after I refused to co-sign her loan. Dad shrugged, it's just a dent. I stayed quiet. That evening, I checked one document and made one phone call. But at 8 a.m., she discovered something that left her speechless. I, 32M, was standing in my driveway when she came around the corner with that smile plastered across her face. The smile that told me exactly what she'd done before she even opened her mouth. My sister had just backed her SUV into my car, and from the way the rear bumper of my sedan was caved in, she hadn't been gentle about it. She told me it was an accident, that she hadn't seen my car there even though I'd parked in the same spot for 3 years. She said these things happen, and insurance would cover it anyway. Her tone was light, almost cheerful, like she was discussing the weather and not the fact that she'd just caused $1,500 in damage to my vehicle. I knew better. This wasn't an accident. 20 minutes earlier, I'd refused to co-sign a loan for her. She'd shown up at my house on a Sunday morning asking me to help her get approved for a $30,000 personal loan. When I asked what it was for, she gave me vague answers about investments and opportunities. When I pressed further, she got defensive and told me I didn't trust her. I explained that I had my own financial obligations and couldn't risk my credit on something so unclear. She'd left my house angry, slamming my front door hard enough to rattle the frame. Now here she was, 20 minutes later, with my bumper wrapped around her trailer hitch. Dad pulled up right as she was delivering her explanation. He got out of his truck and surveyed the damage with barely a glance. He told me it was just a dent, that these things happen, and that I shouldn't make a big deal out of it. He reminded me that family was more important than cars. He suggested I just let it go. I stayed quiet. I looked at the damage, at my sister's satisfied smirk, at my father's dismissive shrug. Something cold settled in my chest, something that had been building for years but had never quite crystallized until that moment. I told them both I needed to make some calls about the insurance and went back inside my house. The thing about being the responsible sibling is that everyone expects you to absorb the hits. My sister had been coddled our entire lives. She dropped out of 2 colleges that Dad paid for. She'd totaled 3 cars before she was 25. She'd borrowed money from our parents countless times and never paid back a cent. And every single time, Dad had covered for her, made excuses for her, told me I needed to be more understanding. Meanwhile, I'd worked 2 jobs to put myself through college. I'd bought my own car at 18 and maintained it meticulously. I'd never asked my parents for money after I turned 20. I'd built a career, bought a house, established myself. And somehow, I was the one being told not to make a big deal out of my sister's deliberate destruction of my property. I sat at my kitchen table and thought about the pattern. This wasn't new. This was just the latest in a long line of incidents where my sister faced no consequences and I was expected to smile and absorb it. The time she'd borrowed my laptop for a presentation and returned it with a cracked screen. The time she'd used my credit card without permission because hers was maxed out. The time she'd told her friends they could stay at my house while I was out of town, and I came home to find my place trashed. Every time, Dad had intervened. Every time, I was told to let it go. Every time, she learned that actions didn't have consequences. That evening, I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder I'd been maintaining for years. Inside were documents I'd collected over time, not out of malice, but out of the growing realization that I might need protection someday. Copies of loans my parents had co-signed for my sister that she'd defaulted on. Records of the 3 times her car insurance had lapsed, and Dad had quietly paid it to keep her legal. A copy of the title to her current SUV, which I discovered was actually in my father's name because her credit was too poor to finance it herself. But the most interesting document was one I'd obtained 6 months earlier through a mutual friend who worked at a dealership. My sister had been making noise about upgrading to a newer vehicle, and she'd applied for financing at multiple places. Every application had been denied. Her credit score was in the basement. She had collections accounts, late payments, and the defaulted loans showing on her record. She was, by any objective measure, completely untrustworthy with money. I sat there staring at these documents and thinking about the co-signed loan she'd asked me for. $30,000 for vague investment opportunities. I pulled up my laptop and started searching. It took me less than an hour to find what I was looking for. My sister had been posting on social media about a business venture. She and her boyfriend were planning to start a boutique. They'd found a location, negotiated a lease, and were ready to launch. The boyfriend had money problems of his own, from what I could gather from his posts. They needed capital. They needed someone with decent credit to help them secure funding. That's when I realized something crucial. The loan she'd asked me to co-sign wasn't just about the money. It was about legitimacy. With my name on the paperwork, with my credit backing the loan, they could present themselves as serious business people. They could leverage that initial loan into more credit, more inventory, more expansion. My good name would be the foundation they'd build on. And when it inevitably collapsed, because neither of them had any business experience or financial discipline, I'd be left holding the debt. I made a phone call. My cousin worked in commercial real estate and knew most of the property managers in our area. I asked him about the location my sister had been posting about. He confirmed they'd signed a lease agreement and were supposed to take possession in 2 weeks. The landlord had required first month, last month, and a security deposit. They'd managed to scrape that together. But they needed the $30,000 for inventory, equipment, and operating capital. I asked my cousin if he knew the landlord personally. He did. I asked if the landlord was aware of my sister's financial history. He wasn't. I spent the next 3 hours compiling a package. Credit reports I'd legally obtained. Public records of the defaulted loans. Documentation of the car insurance lapses. A timeline of failed financial commitments. Everything was legitimate. Everything was public record or information I had legal access to. I wasn't fabricating anything. I was simply organizing the truth into a clear narrative. At 11 that night, I sent an email to the landlord through my cousin's introduction. I explained that I was the brother of one of his prospective tenants and that I felt obligated to provide him with information that might be relevant to his business decision. I attached the documentation. I kept my tone professional and factual. I didn't editorialize. I just presented the pattern. Then I went to bed. The next morning at 8, my phone started ringing. It was my sister. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. By the 5th call, I answered. She was screaming. The landlord had terminated her lease agreement. He'd sent her an email at 7 in the morning informing her that after reviewing additional information about her financial background, he no longer felt comfortable entering into a business relationship with her. He was keeping the security deposit as compensation for his time and the lost opportunity cost, which was apparently permitted under the terms of their agreement if either party withdrew for cause. She'd lost the deposit. She'd lost the location. She'd lost the entire business opportunity. And somehow, she knew I was responsible. She demanded to know what I'd done. I told her I'd simply provided accurate information to someone making a business decision. She called me vindictive. She called me petty. She told me I'd destroyed her dreams over a car bumper. I reminded her that I'd done nothing illegal or unethical. Every piece of information I provided was factual and verifiable. If the truth destroyed her opportunity, perhaps the opportunity wasn't as solid as she'd believed. She hung up on me. 10 minutes later, Dad called. He was disappointed in me. He couldn't believe I'd sabotaged my own sister. He told me I'd crossed a line. That family didn't do this to family. He demanded I call the landlord and tell him I'd made a mistake, that the information was exaggerated or taken out of context. I told him no. I explained that I'd refused to co-sign a loan for a reason. That reason was that my sister had a documented history of financial irresponsibility. I'd protected my own interests by declining to attach my name and credit to her venture. When she'd retaliated by damaging my property, she'd shown exactly the kind of impulsive, consequence-free thinking that made her a poor credit risk. And when a landlord asked me for information, directly through a mutual contact, I'd provided truthful documentation. I hadn't sought him out. I'd responded to an inquiry with facts. Dad told me I was splitting hairs. I told him I was protecting myself from someone who'd just proven she'd damage my property when angry. He said I was holding a grudge. I said I was establishing boundaries. The conversation ended badly. He told me I needed to fix this. I told him I wouldn't. He said he was ashamed of me. I told him I'd learned to live with his disappointment. The rest of that day was quiet. I filed an insurance claim for my car. I provided photos of the damage, a timeline of events, and a statement explaining that my sister had struck my parked vehicle. The insurance company contacted her. She initially tried to deny it, then claimed it was a minor accident that I was blowing out of proportion. The photos contradicted her story. Her insurance ended up covering the repair minus my deductible. I sent her a bill for the deductible, $500. She ignored it. I sent it again with a note explaining that if she didn't pay within 30 days, I'd file a small claims action. She called me psychotic. I told her I'd see her in court if the bill remained unpaid. She paid it, grudgingly, in $20 bills delivered in an envelope with no note, but she paid it. Update 1. 3 weeks passed. My car was repaired. The insurance settled everything. I thought maybe that was the end of it. Then I got a call from my aunt, Dad's sister. She told me she'd heard about what happened and wanted my side of the story. I explained everything. The refused cosign, the damaged car, the revenge that wasn't really revenge, but just information sharing. She listened quietly. Then she told me something I hadn't known. My sister had approached her about co-signing the same loan before she'd come to me. My aunt had refused for the same reasons I had. But unlike me, my aunt had felt guilty about it. She'd actually been considering changing her mind, until she'd heard about the car incident. Now she was glad she'd held firm. My aunt also told me that Dad had been preparing to take out a home equity loan to give my sister the money himself. He'd already filled out the application. He was planning to fund her business venture with borrowed money against the house he and Mom lived in. Mom apparently didn't know yet. That information crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about protecting myself. This was about stopping a pattern that was going to destroy my parents' retirement. Dad's enablement of my sister had gone from inconvenient to actively dangerous. He was preparing to risk his home, his financial security, everything he'd built, to fund a business venture run by someone with no experience and no financial discipline. I called my mother. We'd always had a better relationship, though she usually deferred to Dad on matters involving my sister. I told her everything. The loan request, the car incident, the lease termination, and most importantly, the home equity loan Dad was planning. She was silent for a long time. Then she told me she'd handle it and hung up. 2 days later, Dad called me. His tone was different, subdued. He told me he'd had a long conversation with Mom. He told me he wasn't taking out the home equity loan. He told me that maybe he'd been too lenient with my sister over the years. He didn't apologize exactly, but he acknowledged that I'd been put in a difficult position and that my response, while harsh, wasn't unwarranted. It wasn't the vindication I'd wanted, but it was something. A crack in the facade. An admission that maybe the dynamic had been unfair. Update 2. My sister stopped speaking to me entirely. Family gatherings became tense affairs where she'd leave the room if I entered it. Dad tried to play peacemaker a few times, suggesting we both apologize and move on. I refused. I hadn't done anything requiring an apology. I'd protected my interests and provided truthful information when it was relevant. If she wanted to repair the relationship, she could start by acknowledging that damaging my car was wrong and that her financial history was her responsibility, not mine. She never did. About 2 months after everything went down, I heard through family channels that she and her boyfriend had broken up. The business venture had been his idea primarily, and when it fell apart, so did their relationship. She was living with Dad and Mom again, back in her childhood bedroom at 30 years old. Part of me felt bad about that. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted, if I'd been cruel, if I'd destroyed something that might have succeeded. But then I'd remember the smile on her face when she told me about backing into my car. I'd remember the years of borrowed money never repaid, damaged property never replaced, consequences never faced. And I'd remember that I didn't create her situation. I just refused to be dragged down into it. Update 3. 6 months later, something unexpected happened. My sister reached out. Not with an apology exactly, but with something adjacent to one. She asked if we could talk. I agreed to meet her for coffee in a neutral location. She looked different. Tired, maybe. Less certain. She told me she'd been doing some thinking about why her life kept falling apart. She'd started seeing a therapist, something Dad had apparently insisted on if she wanted to keep living at home. The therapist had helped her see some patterns she'd been blind to. She told me she understood why I'd refused to co-sign the loan. She even understood why I'd contacted the landlord, though she still thought it was harsh. She admitted the car thing was intentional, that she'd been angry and impulsive and wanted to hurt me the way she felt I'd hurt her. She acknowledged it was wrong. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just said she was trying to do better and wanted me to know that she understood my position now in a way she hadn't before. I told her I appreciated that. I told her I'd never wanted to see her fail, but I couldn't sacrifice my own stability to enable choices I knew were bad. I told her that boundaries weren't betrayal, and that maybe if she'd faced consequences earlier, she wouldn't have kept making the same mistakes. We didn't hug. We didn't promise to rebuild our relationship, but we finished our coffee and parted on civil terms. It wasn't reconciliation exactly, but it was something. A neutral ground where maybe, someday, we could meet as equals instead of as enabler and enabled, victim and perpetrator, responsible sibling and scapegoat. Looking back now, I don't regret what I did. The car damage cost me time and money. The family drama cost me peace. But staying quiet would have cost me more. It would have cost me my credit, my financial security, and my self-respect. It would have taught my sister that she could hurt me without consequence. It would have enabled my father's dangerous pattern of sacrificing everything to protect her from reality. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone's self-destruction. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes family means establishing boundaries firm enough to protect everyone, even the people who think they're being punished. My car is fixed. My credit is intact. My sister is learning, slowly, to stand on her own. And I sleep well at night knowing I didn't set myself on fire to keep someone else warm. That's enough. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.